Hello and welcome from Buenos Aires, Argentina to this episode of Crossing Borders with Nathan Lustig, where Nate has conversations with entrepreneurs doing business across borders and the people who support them, with a focus on those that have some connection to Latin America. My name is Josefina Dominguez and I am an editor for Latimlist, a proud sponsor of the Crossing Borders podcast. Sign up for our weekly updates on latimlist.com to get a summary of the week's biggest headlines in Latin American tech news. Nate's guest today is Pedro Moura, co-founder and CEO of Flourish, a digital engagement platform for financial institutions that is helping people build positive money habits. They talk about Pedro's journey from Natal, Brazil to California, where he studied at UC Davis and became fascinated with the idea of creating financial services for underserved individuals. They also discuss what the US and countries in Latin America can do to attract and retain talent, and Pedro provides advice on thinking about your business from a global perspective. We hope you enjoy this conversation with Pedro Moura.
Hey Pedro, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being willing to do it.
Happy to be here. Excited. Just listening to some of the episodes in the last couple of days. It's really exciting, the group of people you put together.
Awesome. Let's jump in. So where are you in the world today?
I am in Berkeley, California, in Northern California, in the East Bay.
Tell me a little bit about your business. What do you do?
Yeah, we are redesigning the way people interact with money. We use behavioral science and game mechanics to help people build positive money habits. We started as a direct consumer product in the US, helping people to build a rainy day fund, but we have since pivoted the business to actually license the technology to incumbents. So that means to us, tier 2 banks and financial institutions, as well as retailers and telecom that offer some sort of financial services. So we really think about us as transforming data into engaging activities for the end consumer. We look at the business in two different lenses. There's the end consumer where money is often complicated and stressful, and we make it rewarding and fun. And then for the institution, bank speak, if you will, there are things called share of wallet, reducing churn, capturing deposits. So those are the things that we help financial institutions with.
And where are you from originally?
I am originally from Natal, Northeast Brazil, but I've been in the US for about 15 years now.
Yeah, and we were just catching up before we started recording that we have been in the same soccer stadium during the World Cup multiple times and didn't know it.
It's the beauty of, I guess, soccer, sports in Latin America. We're both in Mexico, Cameroon, USA, Ghana, and the World Cup in Brazil.
So how did you end up going from Natal to the US?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I come from a family of entrepreneurs and visionaries before those words were cool. So my grandparents, they grew up in a very small city in the Northeast Brazil and seeking education. My grandparents moved their family of 11, including my mother, to Natal to give them higher education. And he was really visionary in that way. And in the early 2000s, my mom and my dad were business owners. They owned a drugstore in the Northeast Brazil when the large chains started coming in. And economically in Brazil in the early 2000s, things were not working well. So my parents got divorced. We were in debt. My mom, instead of venturing to São Paulo like many Northeast families do, she took a one-way trip to California. We landed in the Silicon Valley without knowing what the heck the Silicon Valley was. My mom cleaned houses, did all sorts of odd-end jobs to provide me and my little brother with better education and a better future. And to us at that time meant living with 3 other families in a 2-bedroom house. While my mom cleaned houses during the day, I delivered newspapers at nighttime, but I had access to great education. So I ended up going to the University of California, Davis, to study economics and international relations, where I played for the volleyball team. But I had an expiration date to go back to Brazil because of our immigration status. Fortunately, my mom and my little brother got deported back to Brazil when I was 17. And it was really hard choice of like, do I stay here as a ghost or do I go back to Latin America to try to do vestibular, the so-called exam to enter universities in Brazil. And I had people that guided me that said I had a great opportunity ahead of me. So I studied economics and international relations, got involved with like a professor that was doing microinsurance in Bolivia from the academic side, read the book Mohamed Yanu's Banker to the Poor, and really got into this idea of adapting financial service to underserved individuals. But more specifically, I trying to put my own oxygen mask on in 2010 as I was graduating. I was able to get residency in the US. And Nathan, my life drastically changed when that happened. So I felt like I was locked into a box, and all of a sudden, like I could do anything I could. And to me, what that meant was like I wanted to provide for my family something that we did not have. So I went to a prestigious job, wealth management at Morgan Stanley, and quickly realized not for me. Then transitioned to Chase on the retail side, where I was in a branch in the heart of East LA, serving people that looked like me, my mother, the Latino community. But I was just a number in the branch, and I could not impact product to design products better for the individuals that were coming to me at the branch. I then bumped into a startup now listed in the NASDAQ called Opportune, at the time called Progreso Financiero, the idea of adapting financial service, specifically lending to a underserved consumer. I was in the right place at the right time, where the organization went from 200 people to over 3,000 people. And it was an amazing roller coaster from my end. And anyways, maybe I'll pause here. That led me to business school, and business school, that's where I started Flourish. And the past 2.5 years, I've been building Flourish.
Well, it's an amazing story, and I got lots of follow-up questions. And to start, what did it feel like going from Brazil to California at a young age and having to adapt to a new culture and all of the things that came along with it?
Yeah, it's a fascinating journey. If I look back, I was 15. It's a phase that you don't want any change, right? Changing high school is hard. And now I was changing high school, different country, different culture, and I didn't speak the language. So to me, it was very humbling experience. I hated it. I wanted to go back. Every single month, I lived on the internet with my friends. I lived a dual life of like, I was with all my friends back in Brazil, listening to their type of music, having the conversations that they were having, and not enjoying the culture in the US. It was not until like it clicked for me that like, this is my life now, and I got to adapt. And it's okay to still stay connected to someone there, but I needed to live the life that I was embedded in, that really clicked. Then I started learning the language. I got involved with sports, and a lot changed. But definitely humbling experience from you to be like in a high school, not speaking the language. It's lunchtime. Now you got to make friends, and you got to pretend that you got to walk around the block because you can't speak to anybody. So indeed, a humbling experience for sure.
And with your story, do you have any ideas or advice to countries, whether it's the US or just countries in Latin America, about attracting talent? Because I mean, you're clearly a success story of going across borders to then build great things in the economy where you moved. What do you say to countries? What do you think they should be doing?
Yeah, help me clarify here. Do you mean more about the companies hire within, or I'm not sure I got the question. Sorry.
Well, thinking about in the world today, talent is as mobile as it's ever been. It's getting even more mobile. And people also now with remote work maybe can spend some time in countries and maybe not. And some countries like Chile have basically opened up and said, we want people who are going to add to society and work hard, and we're just going to open it up to people that went to a good university or have a trade or whatever. And you have other countries like the US in recent years, which has tried to make it harder and harder. So what's your take on this whole situation after having lived it and becoming a success story?
I think that I can take it two ways, right? There's the way of saying immigration system is really complicated, for lack of good or better words, but it's the system, right? You can make changes systematically through policy, through other things. Like it sucks that like the people who starting companies in the US are not being rewarded in the sense of from an immigration process. Like my own immigration process, I don't wish that on anybody being a ghost in the system to be able to find ways to become a resident. So that's a more of a political side. Like, look, we should not have borders. We should let talent really thrive. But it's out of my scope. I study economics and international relations was really part of it, but that's a broken system. Then is like I turn into like, what can I control that I have lived this, and how do I build a company that has the culture that welcomes people in Guadalajara, Mexico to work for my company, that also works in Brazil, that also have Silicon Valley talent. So my perspective as an entrepreneur is like, yes, there are constraints in life, but how might we create ways to break barriers? So I was telling you, Nathan, I spent some time in Guadalajara. I worked with amazing people in fintech there. Now we're finding the legal ways to bring them on. Northeast, for me, it was really important to give back and allow people that are genius mathematically, but not had an opportunity to work on products and technology companies. They had to move out of the Northeast to go to Sao Paulo. They had to work for a company internationally, but they were not building their own dreams. So we're finding the culture that people can do that from anywhere in the world and anywhere in Latin America. And even our strategy has been Latin America first when we can hire top talent, and we'll hire in the Valley if there are skill set that people don't have the mileage in Latin America quite yet in terms of startup ecosystem. So my recommendation to universities, countries, places, like how can you create the experiences so your talent from early on, you can mix the academia with startups out of the gate. Like in the US is incredible. The way in which you have the Berkeley ecosystem, like you have people taking out research and working with startups, and there are people from all over the world right out of the gate. Not talking about the system of immigration, that's broken, but the culture of collaboration internationally is amazing. And not always you see this in Latin America, especially in tier 2 cities or in places out of the main hub. So outside of Sao Paulo, outside of Santiago, Chile, outside of Mexico City and maybe Guadalajara, like you don't see that type of cross-pollination that you see in many places in the US.
So let's talk about the journey from being working in a bank to Opportune. How did you identify them as a company that you wanted to work at, and what advice would you give to people that are thinking about, starting their journey at a fast-growing company?
Yeah, mine started at the time, it was 2011. I was 2 years out of school. I had worked in a very large bank, and really, like at the time, there was something called on-demand TV that I was watching, like social impact / for-profit businesses, and I saw the founder's interview, similarly to which you may be listening to this now. And the founder was talking about the mission of their organization, like they wanted to support Latinos within the US through financial service products, and that really spoke to me. Like, and I was like, did not know much about startups. And I was like, started looking it up, and it was like, okay, they had just raised a Series C, they were scaling, they had a role open, and we're like, they have nothing to lose. I went on LinkedIn and said, hey, I worked in a bank. I've done this. Your mission spoke to me and my own personal story, as well as from the perspective of my experience in undergrad, as well as the experiences I had living as an immigrant that couldn't access financial service products, that spoke to me. So then the rest of history there, the company just went growing like crazy.
And I personally think joining an early tech company that's starting to go and seeing that journey from, like you said, 200 to a couple thousand employees fast is one of the best ways that you can learn about being a founder and what success looks like. How would you think about roles or picking the right companies for somebody who's just getting started and maybe isn't ready to be a founder yet?
Yeah, I think it goes back to looking at your own superpowers and what are the things that you want to learn. Because like for me, like it was really easy to speak. Like I worked in a branch, I had supervisor and help people, and Opportune had a role around the sales and retail team. So it was easier for me to have transferable skills from the bank into that scenario. But you may have things, and it was also important to me, like I was really curious to learn about products. So like, although my role in a startup was to lead the retail team and train individuals and make this bridge between the headquarters to the retail team, I was really curious of like translating what the customer wanted in the stores into products. So I started going close to the head of product of the organization and really being the voice of the customer. And I wanted to learn about like, how do you take a pain into like testing a feature and functionality? So to me, it was important to learn how products were created, but my transferable skills was like, I knew retail banking, and to that fintech, it was important having those elements. So similarly, if you worked in a consulting or a large bank, like it is this whole new world of startup, but you have lots of desirable and transferable skills to founders or to organizations that are growing quickly. But it's also important to put the lenses of saying, if I'm given that role, what's my second role that I'm going to do in the company? Because you're going to have to do more than one thing. And you may not be good at it, but do you have the curiosity that you're going to Google things, you're going to call people in your network, you're going to meet people that have solved those problems that you can learn quickly and solve. And that's how people become successful within startups that are growing really quickly.
And how did you decide to start Flourish rather than any other business that you could be doing, or even any other thing you could be doing with your life?
Nathan, and you may relate to this. I was very fortunate to have a career path that I had been successful at in a company that grew really quickly. I was then very fortunate in my life to be accepted in one of the best business schools in the world and build a network of incredible people. And at that level, you've built this confidence that you will never do something that you do not believe in, or work with people that you do not share the similar mission and vision, or put in an environment that you don't believe in the product. So to me, what it meant was I started dating a whole bunch of like seed stage, Series A. Like I didn't care if I started my own company or joined something that shared a mission, but I couldn't quite find something that spoke to me in the same way that I believe products should be built and the world, like you should design the financial service system. So I dated a lot. I looked at a lot of stuff, and then like I had this classmate of mine, Jessica, my now co-founder, who shared a lot of the mission, vision, values. She never had worked in financial service before, but she believed in the impact that could have in the lives of people. She worked in a philanthropic space as an investor. And it was not until like we were like, let's start ideating. Let's spend 10, 15 hours a week interviewing customers, talking to people in the ecosystem. And then we started as a design thinking class around this like financial service, financial empowerment, helping people build a rainy day fund, and never looked back since. Like we worked with many other colleagues in the MBA, but really looked at each other as like, hey, I enjoy solving problems with you. Then started launching our first initial prototypes. When we looked at each other, like we both had left a full-time job, had raised a little bit of like friends and family, angels, and put our savings into doing the venture. So a lot of it, like I would say, if you have an idea and you're listening to this, it's like the people who you work with that share your values are the most important thing that you can start a company with, because things will get tough. And there will be moments of where you're there, like running out of cash. People are closing the doors on you. And if you remember that you're enjoying solving problems with that person and they can have a support system, that's one of the most important things.
And let's talk a little bit about markets. So you have connections and you're from Brazil, but you are based in the US and you went to your university and work experience in the US. How did you think about where you should be launching and how the business is going to evolve in terms of geographies?
Yeah, that's a fascinating one. And we started as a direct-to-consumer product in the US. We then started to validate some of the mechanics of the end users. Quickly realized that we either were going to be a neobank or we had to pivot the model. And we decided to pivot the model to license the technology to banks. And what has happened was our very first co-creation with the financial institutions happened to be in Brazil. We had a largest credit union in Brazil reach out to us that they were like, we're solving a similar problem. We don't have companies within the country doing something like this. Can you come down and see if there's something we can do? So I started learning about the pains of the financial institutions there. We then ended up doing a couple of pilots with US-based credit unions, thinking that 1,200 banks with over 1 billion asset in the US versus 200 banks with over 1 billion asset in Latin America. 6x the size of the market, just like in terms of number of banks that we could target. However, what we saw was Latin America had this really early stage of B2B financial technology companies. The ecosystem has been an emerging market, is non-existent or nearly non-existent. The banks used to build everything internally, and they saw the first waves of Nubanks, Creditas, doing direct-to-consumer products, or Questi in Mexico, and they put a lot of pressure on the incumbents. So from a market perspective, what we said is, and by the time this air will be public, we just recently raised a seed round with a lead investor in Brazil because of things like open banking coming in Brazil, because of the first wave of fintechs have gone and put pressure on tier 2 banks or others that are turning into banks. So really, we were born in the US, we're thinking global from day one, but the focus is the Brazilian market is really important. We have a customer in Bolivia called Banco Sol, which was our first software as a service customer, has B2B in Bolivia. So we also see markets like Mexico, Colombia as really important to us. So between seed and Series A, we will go from one software as a service with a couple of pilots, co-creation projects to go to 4 or 5 banks integrated our solution. And we believe about 3 of those will come from Brazil, but we are getting inbounds from countries like Mexico, from countries even like Honduras. We know we got to be focused. Brazil is our focus, but we're also being opportunistic of getting to pilot and expand our solutions in more than one country. And last but not least, the US is a really strategic from both valuation and as we scale. So we see as America's company. And look, the problem that we're solving is also applied to emerging markets like Southeast Asia, Africa. Latin America have a multi-million-dollar already business, just thinking around that. But really, we were born global from the early days, and then with the ambition, but really with the focus of getting to this next stage of having our solution implemented with a certain number of banks.
Well, let's talk about that next stage. What is the next stage? Where do you go now that you've raised your round?
Yeah, I think the work is only beginning, right? Now it's nice to have a run rate of 2 years, but now we got to put capital to work and generating value. So we have 3 things that we'll be working on. One is really delighting our early adopters of the technology. So expanding the base in which the banks that we are working with and tighten the screws on the enterprise solution. Number 2 is like repeating the sales process, right? You don't have a scalable business if you don't repeat that process. So that means customer number 3, 4, or 5, and repeating and understanding and learning what that is. And the third element is really, as we talk internally, we talk from either resource or platform, is like, how do we build the scalable team? And that needs both people, but as well as thinking around product as a platform that can work in multiple places. So there will be investment in people. So if you're listening to this and you're curious around technology, you're a software developer in Latin America looking to work for an international company, and there's a couple key hires around product within the team, but it's still not yet the time to scale the team quite yet. It's from 10 to 15 or 16 people. So a couple of key hires and tighten the screws before we really scale to dozens of banks.
If you could go back to when you were just starting at Opportune, knowing everything you know today that you later wanted to start a startup, what advice would you give yourself?
Look, your grit and your curiosity will get you far. Place yourself in uncomfortable situations the sooner you can to do something you believe in. Get yourself out there the sooner that you can and share with people what you care about. And I think you will find mission-aligned individuals that will want to support you.
Do you have any books, blogs, podcasts, or documentaries that you like to recommend to people, whether about startups or just life in general?
Yeah, I just recently wrote a post around so behavior economics is really important to us, and we're talking internally. Our team has coined this term called behavioral hacking. So I put a list of books around psychology and behavior economics that people should definitely read, and that list include authors like Dan Ariely. One specifically book that I just finished that I highly recommend. It may be a little bit on the technical side, but it's The Brain That Changes Itself, and it's about how people learn and what it means to have brain plasticity. Of just essentially, look, you have these habits, but some things in your life happen. How are you wired to learn and change? And it was really fascinating to see the science behind it and how individuals that have gone to cure some illness or even change the way they saw the world, and what is that your brain is doing behind the hood. So that to me was fascinating, and it should be on the written list of folks that are thinking about behavioral science or they're building technology products that have habit building involved with it.
Where do you see Flourish in 2 years from now?
2 years from now, Flourish will be a known name in the Americas for helping turning data into behavior in the financial service system. We will be, in 2 years from now, we'll be with about 12 to 15 large institutions using our technology. And we'll really be known for this brand that turns data into action in the stack of the banking system. The same way that you have Salesforce with the CRM and you have Twilio for messaging, Flourish will be for the rewards and engagement in the behavioral system within the banking system.
Well, it's going to be really fun to see you continue your journey and execute on that vision. Thanks for taking the time to do the podcast and sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Nathan. The work that you're doing to build the ecosystem in Latin America and the US is quite incredible, and it's a privilege to be here, and thank you for the work you do, and looking forward and continue to build a relationship with you.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of Crossing Borders with our guest Pedro Moura. And thank you to Angel and Draca for producing this podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share with a friend and give us a rating on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's the best way to share what's going on in Latin America's ecosystem.